Okay, we are back. We are on chapter 6, and Amos and Martin were playing catch with Edward on the ship, and they have thrown him overboard, which means he's now in the ocean. All right, here's the picture for chapter 6. It's the hat floating down into the water. How does a China rabbit die? Can a China rabbit drown? Is my hat still on my head? These were the questions that Edward had asked himself as he went sailing out over the blue sea. The sun was high in the sky, and from what seemed to be a very long way away, Edward heard Abilene call his name. "Edward!" she shouted. "Come back!" Come back? Of all the ridiculous things to shout, thought Edward. As he tumbled ears over tail through the air, he managed to catch one last glimpse of Abilene. Remember, a glimpse is a quick glance. She was standing on the deck of the ship, holding onto the railing with one hand. In the other hand, there was a lamp. No, it was a ball of fire. No, Edward realized it was his gold pocket watch that Abilene held in her hand. She was holding it up high, and it was reflecting the light of the sun. My pocket watch, he thought. I need that. And then Abilene disappeared from view, and the rabbit hit the water with such tremendous force that the hat blew off his head. That answers that question, thought Edward as he watched the hat dance away in the wind. And then he began to sink. He sank and sank and sank. He kept his eyes open the whole time, not because he was brave, but because he had no choice. He painted on eyes, witnessed the blue. His painted on eyes witnessed the blue water turning to green and then to blue again. They watched as it finally became as black as night. Edward went down and down. Okay, so here's a picture of the ship in the background, and there's Edward. He's going down without any of his clothes on still. He said to himself, if I'm going to drown, certainly I would have done so by now. Far above him, the ocean liner with Abilene aboard sailed blithely on, and the China rabbit landed, finally, on the ocean floor, face down, and there, with his head in the muck, he experienced the first and genuine and true emotion. Edward Tulane was afraid. Okay, that's the end of chapter 6. So, hopefully you've noticed at the beginning of the story that Edward, he doesn't love anybody, and he really doesn't feel any emotions. But it's saying here that he's experienced his first true emotion, and he's afraid. Okay, I'm going to read chapter 7 next, and this is a wave in the ocean. He told himself that certainly Abilene would come and find him. This, Edward thought, is much like waiting for Abilene to come home from school. I will pretend that I am the dining room of the house on Egypt Street, waiting for the little hand to move to the 3 and the big hand to land on the 12. If only I had my watch, then I would know for sure. But it doesn't matter. She will be here soon, very soon. Hours passed, and then days, and weeks, and months. Abilene did not come. Edward, for lack of anything better to do, began to think. He thought about the stars. He remembered what they looked like from his bedroom window. What made them shine so brightly, he wondered, and why were they still shining somewhere even though he could not see them? Never in my life, he thought, have I been further away from the stars than I am now. He considered, too, the fate of the beautiful princess who had become a warthog. Why had she become a warthog? Because the ugly witch turned her into one? That was why. And then the rabbit thought about Pellegrina. He felt in some way that he could not explain to himself that she was responsible for what had happened to him, and it was almost as if she, and not the boys, had thrown Edward overboard. She was like the witch in the story. No, she was the witch in the story. True, she did not turn him into a warthog, but just the same, she was punishing him, although he could not say for what. On the 297th day of Edward's ordeal, a storm came, a storm that was so powerful it lifted Edward off the ocean floor and led him in a crazy, wild, and spinning dance. The water pummeled him and lifted him and shoveled him back down. Help, thought Edward. The storm, in its ferocity, actually flung him all the way out of the sea, and the rabbit glimpsed for a moment the light of an angry and bruised sky. The wind rushed through his ears. It sounded to him like Pellegrina was laughing, but before he had time to appreciate being above the water, he was tossed back down into the depths. Up and down, back and forth he went until the storm wore itself out, and Edward saw that he was beginning again his slow descent to the ocean floor. So think about this. Why do you think that there was a sudden storm? And also it said that he was 297 days he had been at the bottom of the ocean floor. So he's almost been there a full year. What kind of natural disaster do you think may have been happening there? I was thinking hurricane. Oh, help me, he thought. I can't go back there. Help me. But still, down he went. Down, down, down. And then, suddenly, the great wide net of a fisherman reached out and grabbed the rabbit. The net lifted him higher and higher until there was almost an unbearable explosion of light. And Edward was back in the world, lying on the deck of a ship surrounded by fish. "Ah, what's this?" said a voice. "Ain't no fish," said another voice, "that's for sure." The light was so brilliant that it was hard for Edward to see. But finally, shapes appeared out of the light, and then faces, and Edward realized that he was looking up at two men, one young and one old. "Looks like some toy," said the grizzled old man. He bent and picked up Edward and held him by his front paws, considering him. "A rabbit, I reckon. It's got whiskers and rabbit ears, or the shape of rabbit ears at least." "Yeah, sure, a rabbit toy," the younger man said and turned away. "I'll take it home to Nellie. Let her fix it up and set it right. Give it to some child." The old man placed Edward carefully on the crate, positioning him so that he was sitting up and could look out at the sea. Edward appreciated the courtesy of the small gesture, but he was heartily sick of the ocean and would have been satisfied to never set eyes on it again. "There you go," said the old man. As they made their way back to shore, Edward felt the sun on his face and the wind blowing through the little bit of fur left on his ears, and something filled his chest, a wonderful feeling. He was glad to be alive. "Look at that rabbit," the old man said. Looks like it's enjoying the ride, don't it?" Yep," the young man said. In fact, Edward Tulane was so happy to be back among the living that he did not even take umbrage to being referred to as it. Okay, and then this is chapter 8, and there is the man, we don't know his name yet, that found him in the ocean, and he said he's going to take Edward back to Nellie, and Nellie can fix the rabbit up and give it to a child. That's his plan. On land, the old fisherman stopped to light a pipe, and then, with the pipe clenched between his teeth, he walked home, carrying Edward atop his left shoulder as if he were conquering a hero. The fisherman balanced him there, placing a calloused hand at Edward's back. He talked to him in a soft, low voice as they walked. "You'll like Nellie, you will," said the old man. "She's had her sadness, but she's an all right girl." Edward looked at the small town blanketed in dusk, a jumble of buildings huddled together, the ocean stretching out in front of it all. And he thought that he would like anything else, that he would not like anything and anybody that was not at the bottom of the sea. "Hello, Lawrence," called a woman from the front of the shop. "What have you got?" "Fresh catch," said the fisherman. "Fresh rabbit from the sea." He lifted his cap to the lady and kept walking. "There you are now," said the fisherman. He took the pipe out of his mouth and pointed with the stem of it at a star in the purpling sky. "There's your North Star right there. Don't never have to be lost when you know where that fellow is." Edward considered the brightness of the small star. Do they all have names, he wondered? "Listen at me," said the fisherman, talking to a toy. "Oh, well, here we are then." And with Edward still on his shoulder, the fisherman walked up a stone-lined path and into a little green house. "Look here, Nellie," he said. "I've brought you something from the sea." "I don't want nothing from the sea," came a voice. "Aw, now, don't be like that now. Come on, come and see." An old woman stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. When she saw Edward, she dropped the apron and clapped her hands together and said, "Oh, Lawrence, you brung me a rabbit." "Direct from the sea," said Lawrence. He took Edward off his shoulder and stood him up on the floor and held onto his hands and made him do a deep bow in the direction of Nellie. "Oh," said Nellie, "here." She clapped her hands together again, and Lawrence passed Edward to her. Nellie held the rabbit out in front of her and looked over him from tip to toe. She smiled. Have you ever in your life seen anything so fine?" she said. Edward felt immediately that Nellie was a very discerning woman. "She's beautiful," breathed Nellie. For a moment, Edward was confused. Was there another object of beauty in the room? "What will I call her?" "Susanna," said Lawrence. "Just right," said Nellie. "Susanna." She looked deep into Edward's eyes. "First off, Susanna will need some clothes, won't she?" Okay, so here is Nellie, and there's Lawrence is his name, the husband, and there is Edward. So you'll notice that Nellie has decided that Edward is a girl now, or is a girl, and Edward is now going to be called Susanna. So that's a little bit funny. All right, we're going to pause there. In chapter 9, we'll start with Susanna in her new home. See you soon.